Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Council on the implementation of Resolution 2046, which addresses outstanding bilateral issues between Sudan and South Sudan, as well as the situation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile states. The relationship between Sudan and South Sudan continues to be determined by the war in Sudan and its regional humanitarian, security, and the political consequences. Given the geographical, historical, economic, and the political ties between the two countries, South Sudan is one of the neighboring countries most affected by these conflicts. Since the start of the war in Sudan in 2023, over 1.3 million Sudanese refugees and South Sudanese have fled to South Sudan. This massive influx has compounded an already dire humanitarian situation, increasing pressure on very limited access to food, basic health care, and education services in South Sudan. The war in Sudan has also posed serious challenges to South Sudan's security through cross-border movements of armed groups, weakened border control, and increased circulation of weapons. Mindful of its internal security and oil revenues, in December 2025, South Sudan managed to mediate a tripartite agreement with the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces to deploy South Sudan People's Defense Forces to secure the Higlik oil field. Despite episodic incidents, the agreement still holds but remains fragile, given the volatile context in Sudan. Mindful of the impacts of the war on both countries, the two governments sought to maintain a constructive bilateral relationship through high-level engagements and visits to Port Sudan and Juba in December 2025 and January of this year. These discussions focus on securing borders against the movements of armed groups, securing and opening the Higlik oil facility, maintaining oil exports and bilateral trade, and agreeing to form a joint economic committee to oversee coordination on these matters. Mr. President, Abyei's final status remains one of the most important unresolved issues between Sudan and South Sudan. Abyei continues to be severely affected by the war in Sudan, as it has received over 46,000 refugees and returnees, as well as IDPs, further stretching humanitarian needs beyond current capacity. The war in Sudan has also impeded the seasonal reverse migration of herders from Abyei towards the north, resulting in the provisional settlement of about 11,000 Misraya in Abyei. The ISF presence in the northern part of Abyei as a direct consequence of the Sudan conflicts and the SSPDF's continued presence in the southern parts of the Abyei continue in breach of existing agreements and Security Council resolutions on Abyei. These military activities in and around Abyei have significantly impeded the operations of UNISFA. In my meetings with government officials of Sudan and South Sudan in Khartoum and Juba during my recent visits in March and April, I reiterated the need for insulating Abyei from the conflicts in Sudan and challenges facing South Sudan, strengthening UNISFA's capacity to maintain security within the Abyei box, and resuming dialogue between Sudan and South Sudan on the final status of Abyei. I also called on the parties to allow for additional United Nations police units for UNISFA and the operationalization of Attorney airstrip to facilitate UNISFA's operations, mobility, and logistical support. In Khartoum, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereignty Council and commander-in-chief of the Sudanese Armed Forces, stressed Sudan's commitments to a peaceful resolution in accordance with the 2011 agreement, and assured that Sudan is prepared to continue discussions on expanding joint measures to secure the Abyei area. In Juba, senior government officials conveyed President Kiir's commitments to advancing the Abyei file and making progress on the 5 benchmarks as required by the UN Security Council. Mr. President, it is encouraging to note that both governments of Sudan and South Sudan reiterated their commitments to advancing dialogue and reconvening the joint political and security mechanism. Officials from both sides of the Abyei Joint Oversight Committees also agreed to explore the feasibility of convening a virtual meeting to initiate preparations for future engagement. South Sudan authorities further agreed to include Abyei in their bilateral engagements with the Sudan counterparts. South Sudanese military officials also expressed willingness to withdraw the SSPDF forces from the southern parts of Abyei and requested the deployment of UNISFA forces to ensure security in the area. In my visit to Abyei last week, Abyei authorities, traditional leaders, civil society, and women and youth representatives expressed their serious concern over the lack of progress on the final status of Abyei, emphasizing the critical role that UNISFA has been playing in the protection of civilians and underscoring the urgent need for immediate deployments of additional AMPO to address growing law and order challenges. I encouraged the local stakeholders to take proactive measures as a shared responsibility to demilitarize the Abyei area, noting that a secure environment is the foundation for sustainable peace and continued humanitarian support to Abyei. Although the relationship between the Ngok Dinka and the Misrea communities has improved, the establishment of joint administration and security police arrangements in the current context was viewed as further entrenching the status quo without resolving the final status of Abyei. In my engagements with the African Union and Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, I reiterated the importance of strengthened AU, IGAD, UN collaboration and coordination on the resolution of Abyei's final status. Both the AU and IGAD have expressed their commitments to enhancing our joint efforts in this regard. We will continue to encourage both governments to restart the dialogue as part of efforts to resolve Abyei's final status. My office has also continued sustained engagements with the Abyei High-Level Committee, co-chairs of the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee from both countries, and other relevant stakeholders to support preparations for renewed bilateral dialogue on Abyei. These discussions have also focused on the need for both governments to make progress against the benchmarks linked to UNISFA's mandate renewal and address prevailing security dynamics that risk impeding political progress. In this regard, I maintained close coordination with the UNISFA acting head of mission and AMI's leadership to ensure coherent political outreach on Abyei-related issues. Mr. President, South Kordofan and the Blue Nile states continue to be affected by the war in Sudan, as they are part of the theater of intensified fighting to control the Abyei to Deni road linking South Kordofan with North Kordofan, a major logistic access. The fighting in Blue Nile states has also expanded to Kumok, a border town, which was captured by the ISF in March this year. Due to this intensified fighting, critical infrastructure in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile has been destroyed, and the humanitarian situation has deteriorated. Aid delivery has been hindered, and the population is facing acute food insecurity and malnutrition. The two states are particularly vulnerable to the disruptions of agricultural production due to combined effects of climate change and war. In line with UN Security Council Resolution 2046, I will continue to support efforts to resolve outstanding issues from the Comprehensive Peace Agreement between Sudan and South Sudan. I will continue to provide support to the Personal Envoy of the Secretary General for Sudan, the African Union and IGAD, as well as other partners in their ongoing efforts to end the war in Sudan and to initiate a political process that should also include South Kordofan and the Blue Nile states. I will also continue to engage with the governments of Sudan and South Sudan to restart dialogue on the final status of Abyei and work with all stakeholders to encourage progress on the 5 benchmarks for the renewal of UNISFA's mandate as required by this Council. I thank you for your attention.
我感谢孙光先生所做的通报。